Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to business continuity, COVID, workspaces, crisis management, well-being, anything that can help you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Longtime listeners and longtime viewers, if you're watching through YouTube, you know that I love to read. I have bookshelves and bookshelves just full of books. And recently I came across one that I thought was very, very relevant in today's world. Reconnecting Workspaces: Pathways to Thrive in the Virtual, Remote, and Hybrid World. And I'd like to welcome to the show today the author of this book, Jennifer Britton. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be with you for a short while and with the listeners as well to talk a little bit about reconnecting workspaces, especially as we continue to navigate a world that is ever changing.
Yes, congratulations on the book, by the way. I know they're not the easiest thing in the world to pull together, and there's lots of great information in here.
Well, thank you. It's really, as I think our conversation will unfold, it's been a book in process for many, many years, even before the pandemic. So looking forward to sitting down with you today and sharing a little bit with your listeners.
Well, before we get to the book, because there are a few things that I do want to touch on today, can you take a minute to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got into what you do?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the CEO of a Canadian-based performance improvement company called Potentials Realized. We offer coaching, training, and consulting services to organizations and teams to really help them continue to navigate ever-changing environments. So I opened the doors here virtually in April of 2004 when virtual businesses were really quite unheard of. And that stemmed out of about 13 years of my own leadership experience working with organizations including the United Nations and Canadian and British NGOs, primarily across the Americas, so Central, South America, the Caribbean, and a little bit of time out of Europe on small and large-scale international development projects, ranging from community-based initiatives around healthcare to post-disaster management initiatives. And so that post-disaster piece, I think, is probably a piece that I really brought forward, not recognizing how much it would become important in the work that we do. So that's a very broad strokes. I'm the author of now 7 books. Reconnecting Workspaces actually was my 6th book. And we're going to be talking about that today, but it was followed up last October by the 90-Day Guide for Success, which really takes a lot of these principles and breaks it down into a 90-day framework for anyone to really look at, sort of percolate on, because so much of this work is about creating regular pause points, right? As the world is moving quickly, how do we stop and pause and think about what we're doing and maybe make those nano shifts, those micro shifts that actually we see from research and practice really makes a big difference in the work and the relationships that we have.
And pausing these days is almost impossible for many people because it's so fast paced. Exactly. Things are changing so much, and let's face it, the pandemic really changed a lot of things.
It did, and we know, and again, this is sort of the practice that I bring forward from decades ago. In crisis, even post-crisis, how do we intentionally create these micro pauses? It doesn't have to be long, but we need to really stop and look at what's happening, what's shifting. It's like driving. I'm Canadian, so what do you do when you drive into snow and you hit a skid? You look where you're going. And so are we looking where we're going, or are we really just running with blinders on? And I think that's a big part of this, is really developing that sensory awareness, developing that cognitive awareness around the changing systems in which we operate within.
Yeah, and being in Canada myself, for early October, as we're recording, you said the S word. Snow, for anybody who doesn't know what that is. It's when there's no snow on the ground, that's a bad word to say for Canadians. So let's jump into the book, Reconnecting Workspaces. One of the things you talk about is a difference between a group and a team. Wouldn't they be the same thing? Just being, I have a team that reports to me, I have a group that reports to me. Aren't they the same thing?
That's such a great question. So my whole body of work, all 7 books, touch somehow on this notion of team versus group. And so, any kind of grouping can have many different webs of relationships. But the way we hold teams, that is that formal or informal authority. Teams typically are people who know each other and work together for a shared purpose and are interdependent. Whether or not they're aligned, they exist for a reason. And those connections, those webs of relationships, as I like to call it, are critical in terms of understanding who we are, how we operate, how we're interdependent on each other, even if we physically don't see each other. And I think this is really relevant in today's workspace, where some people are back to the office and never left, right? Because they are essential workers or out in the field. Other
Mhm.
people are hybrid, right? The hybrid work across North America and Europe right now is still a big area. And so those teams, even if they don't see each other regularly, they still are interdependent. And that's very different than a group where people come together for shared interest, but are not interdependent. So in a workspace context, we might see groups of new leaders coming together for learning experiences. While they have that shared interest and perhaps a shared role, they aren't interdependent. So after that experience together, off they go, take their learning out into the world. And so, how this plays out in my work specifically as a group and a team coach, I'm often brought in and asked to come in and work with a team. That team may, again, be a project team, it may be a matrix team, but there is a purpose for that team coming together. And our work really is about helping the team, its individual members, and as a collective, really get clear on who they are and why they exist. Very different than the group coaching work, which is all about the individual. What do
Mhm.
I need to do? What do I need to activate? I'm not thinking about a we, I'm thinking about a me. So that's a pretty high level description, but I think it has implications in today's workspaces where who are we and how are we operating? Who are we in relationship with? And who do we need to think about alignment with as well?
In today's hybrid world or virtual world, isn't it difficult to bring together teams and groups? Like for both, one, because we're all separated, and you mentioned, you gave some examples. Some people were in the office and stayed in the office because of the nature of what they were doing, or out in the field or whatever. Is it still difficult to bring teams together or groups together, or is it more difficult to bring teams together in groups?
Mm. I think a lot of it is your context, right? Right now, and this is what I think we're just seeing such variety. There are teams, groups, organizations that have really developed tight culture, right? And so it doesn't matter whether we're physically in the office or we're like distributed, we have an identity. We know that we're part of this organization. One of the features of the pandemic we've seen anecdotally and also from a research perspective that one of the impacts has been that weakening of the social fabric. So I think organizations that haven't paid attention to culture, it is really hard right now because there's people aren't feeling connected,
Mm.
regardless of where they are. So I don't want to say across the board it's really easy, it's really hard. I think a lot of this goes to what team practices have you continued to develop, evolve, and or maintain. We know, especially for teams, that they need multiple things to thrive in any context, regardless of if it's in person, virtual, remote, hybrid. All teams need to have clear understanding of their goals and their roles. They also have to have team practices that keep them connected. So again, it's not about physically or virtually being together, but we have to do that with intentionality and purpose. And I think this is where we're seeing a lot of the toing and froing because the focus has been, in many instances, less on what do we need to do and more on, how do we do it? So can we get back to purpose? Because in the unexpected, as we know, things are going to continue to change. So we want to keep
Mhm.
the focus on like, why are we here? What's the purpose of our work together, etc.
You mentioned an interesting word there, the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, what makes a good culture to create good teams and or groups? What's a bad culture? Because we're coming out of the pandemic. So much changed in an organization. The culture changed in an organization, but there was a culture before the pandemic. And now that we're coming out, it seems there's going to be, for many organizations, a new culture,
Yeah.
almost like a third one coming along. So
Yeah.
how to dig a little bit deeper in that, how does culture affect some of the things that you've already mentioned?
hmm Well, this is a great topic, and so if I can sort of put it, I'm going to frame it as organizational culture, but I also have to say it in light of the intercultural work I've done for 3 decades. And we know that whether we're talking geographic culture or organizational culture, it is ever changing. It never stays the same.
Mm,
Think about your community, wherever you are in the world, whether you're here in Canada or the US or abroad. Really, our culture is different every year. And so yes, our cultures are changing. Culture really is, how do we do things here? So it's our norms, it's our habits, it's our practices. And I think the big shift, right, the unexpected shift was we couldn't be together physically, and so many teams stopped meeting. Other teams started doing huddles, and now that they're back in the office, that practice has also shifted. So, there's actually a lot of research, old adage, culture eats strategy for breakfast. A lot of organizations are still saying, oh, we got to get back to strategy. Well, what about culture? Culture is the ecosystem in which we operate. It's our oxygen, it's our frameworks and our parameters. So again, it's not an easy area to dip into. I think, leaders, especially in formal training programs, MBAs, we talk a little bit about culture, but we don't really know how to develop culture. It's not something we can turn the switch on, because it is based on, our relational effects. So how we communicate, connect with each other, what we take a stand for. And that's a bit of a gray zone for a lot of
mhm,
leaders. So it is a fascinating area. I'm sure, since you surfaced it here as we go through our conversation today, it's going to be something that will show up. And really, many researchers would say the difference between a great organization and an outstanding one is one that really understands how to navigate the ever changing culture, right? It's ever changing.
mhm,
It's not going to stop and be static. So how do we continue to operate with that? And that's where, from a more theoretical standpoint, we want to bring people back to what we know about what helps teams thrive. And that's really what Reconnecting Workspaces is grounded in. The team effectiveness research is not changing and has not changed for many decades, regardless of context, which is really interesting. So we got to go back to the basics, which is, disaster management, crisis management 101.
mhm, yep. I'm familiar with those.
Yeah, and that's the entry point for me too, right? In my former world of work, that was what I was a crisis manager. We've got to keep going back to the basics. We've got to keep building those relationships. We've got to keep, being very clear on what we're here to do and constantly communicate, because the
Mhm.
context is ever changing.
Well, sorry to jump into that culture piece right now, but the last little while I've been really intrigued by it
Yes.
because there are, and I've talked to so many people on this show, nearly 500 episodes now. And so I've met with different people in different parts of the world, in different industries, and culture pops up more times than you think it does.
hmm
And so I've been getting really intrigued by it myself. And, I'm starting to get drawn towards that topic because I'm finding, you can't just put in a plan. And using your book as an example and what you talk about here, you can't just say, we're going to meet virtually, we're going to do it this way, we're going to do it that way, when there isn't the culture behind it that supports those kind of, um, I don't want to use the word mandate, but those directives,
Yes.
and that tends to cause even more problems, right?
hmm Well, we're talking a lot more these days about systems and ecosystems. And just as you said, if we really want to change our culture, we've got to not only look at what we're doing, but how are we paying people? How are we rewarding people? How are we providing feedback mechanisms? And again, these can
Hmm.
change. These are changing quite dramatically. So when, someone is saying, we need you in the office to collaborate, well, are the processes, are the systems changing? Are the people showing up to have those collaborative conversations as well? So culture, I think, very much is such a significant issue. And I'm really actually glad that you brought it up, because chapters 3 and 4 of Reconnecting Workspaces touch on this. It's been an area that I think in my own writing, I'm increasingly trying to articulate different frameworks around it as well, but from a practitioner's edge, right? Like that's why I write, is how do we do things differently? How do we
Mhm.
have different conversations? Because how does culture change? It changes through conversations, and it changes through relationships. It doesn't just change because someone decides, oh, our culture today is X. It actually, that is maybe something we're guided towards or we're moving towards, but it happens through people. And so how do people change? Through time together, physically, virtually, hybrid.
Yeah, and sometimes those last minute directives that come out simply because somebody read something somewhere in another book. Oh, let's just do that, and
Yeah.
tells everyone to change. And that doesn't work. It reminds me when I worked in the restaurant industry, a long, long time ago, that our restaurant, the president would visit restaurants in Florida, come back with an idea, and then all of a sudden mandate it to all 32 other restaurants or so in the chain that I worked,
Mm,
and things would just fall apart.
yeah.
Say what's going on, and that was the culture.
Hmm.
It came back to the culture he was creating.
Yeah. So is it top down? Is it bottom up? Right. And one of the big changes that, the last few years has really led to has been, well, obviously disruption on so many levels, but remote work really means that we need to change the way that we work. Leaders cannot command and control. Leaders cannot say, I need you to do this when someone is, not physically present.
Hmm.
And so, after 2 years of people having more autonomy, more self-direction, I think one of the things we're seeing at present really is that toing and froing, people wanting to revert to how we've always led, quote unquote. Well, that's a
Yes.
different philosophy. It's a different paradigm. And I think we're not really being, as articulate and saying, what, the paradigm did shift. And as an organization, do you remain in that paradigm, or are you trying to go back to something that once was? A
That's
stretched
right.
mind can never revert to the way it was. I think that was Einstein saying something like that. So again, I think that's another piece that we're seeing right now. When we have an experience, whether it's planned or it's unexpected, do we change? Yes, we change. But can we go back to the old path?
Yeah.
Many can't. So
And on that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. We are talking with Jennifer Britton today and her book, Reconnecting Workspaces. And we will be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.